But speaking of people that you weren't exactly all that hot on, or that you haven't exactly, been willing to jump on board the hype train of, Gavin Newsom is someone that I think consistently in your rankings you put towards the, end of the list, or a
Yeah.
couple of them, I don't even think he made it onto the list, which is interesting because, of course, he's kind of the most popular person. If you just look at the betting markets, for example, most of them have Gavin Newsom at number 1 for 28. He's made it very clear that he has these presidential ambitions for a long time. Some people even thought he would run against Joe Biden. And recently, since the last time we had you on, he's made this big Twitter push, or X, whatever you want to call it, hiring new strategists to basically take over his account and turn him into the Democratic version of Donald Trump, all the way down to straight up mimicking like a fucking parrot, the way Trump talks, his mannerisms, the way he tweets, straight up, trying to just be the Democrat Trump and trigger MAGA, which he's successfully done by getting the Fox News anchors to, woke scold him, by getting people like Tommy Lahren to get in his replies and literally woke scold him over the sort of offensive shit that Trump would say and they wouldn't even think about or say a word about. So what's your opinion on Gavin Newsom since the last time we talked? Do you think that he's come out of the gate strong with a good strategy, as I do? Even as someone who doesn't like Gavin Newsom, I have to give him credit for picking up a lot of attention, for going viral over and over again, and for actually getting under the skin of MAGA.
Yeah, well, I think my stance on Newsom, and part of why I was so kind of low on him for such a long time, was that I think Newsom fits this kind of new archetype that is a bit novel for this current era, looking at it from a systemic kind of materialist perspective, this very polarized era where both parties are playing hardball. It's very, very rare for the state level for a state government to be split between parties. Nearly every state government is a trifecta now, so the states are kind of since Trump, but especially since Biden, have become kind of staging grounds for national politics, and they weren't up until recently.
Right.
And the consequence of that is that it's not really the most talented or effective or innovative policymakers that get the most attention, but it's the ones who have the largest states, can have the most power, govern the most people, have the most national relevance, who reach the national stage, because when everything is relative to national politics, your state size is going to make you the most relevant voice in that. So it's sort of a media environment that selects more towards the size of the state than the actual politician governing it. And I think we saw this really clearly with DeSantis in leading up to 2024, where he was somebody who we can all kind of tell in retrospect was not an inherently very talented politician, wasn't particularly charismatic, didn't really do a good job when push came to shove at actually meeting, being what the base wanted. But he was able to get a tremendous national profile just based on the sheer size of his state. Other governors pass a lot of laws that he did too, like the governor of Arkansas or Tennessee.
He also really leaned into triggering the libs, which I think Gavin is doing in the reverse. He's just leaning into triggering the other side. Ron DeSantis did that in Florida for fucking months and months. That's how he got a lot of that hype.
Yeah, the "don't say gay" thing was kind of specifically designed to cause uproar with people involved in national politics. Everything was kind of done on a national matrix. But it was, to the extent he did anything new or really that innovative, it was just that he was doing it on the largest scale. I think this is also the case for Abbott, too, to the extent that he gets coverage, although he's a bit more of a parochial figure and hasn't made as much of an effort to become a national figure in the way that DeSantis or Newsom has. So I think that they're two good comparisons. Newsom and DeSantis are kind of alike in a lot of the same ways. And what had me very down on him was that I was looking at Newsom as somebody who had this kind of unmatched, very strong platform for this current moment as the kind of de facto leader of the statewide resistance to Trump. And I was I thought okay, well, if this guy's the real deal, he'll be consistently getting DeSantis level attention from the jump. But what I saw from him was he was doing the podcast with Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon, kind of just overcorrecting in the direction of this new media consensus, in the same way that he was very, very pro-Biden back when that was seen as the way to go as a Democrat back in 2023. So I didn't really see anybody, like, to the extent you can give DeSantis credit is that he might have actually innovated on some issues. He did like kind of bring up these kind of hot button topics like schooling or trans rights that weren't necessarily as salient before, and did his own role to push it into the mainstream. What I saw with Newsom is him being just a fundamentally very reactive figure, just seeing stuff that like constantly trying to fight the last war. Like in 2023, he saw, it might have been a good idea over the past couple of years to like be friendly with Biden because his standing seemed to have improved so much after the midterms. So he tries to become Biden's number one defender. Then he sees after the 2024 election, this is all after the fact. He's not doing any of these pushes before it becomes this consensus that, you need to go on podcast and do new media and reach out to the right. So he's doing all this stuff after the point that it has an impact. And it's like none of it really seems to have like a smart basis. His podcast gets terrible reviews. People in California think it's a ridiculous waste of time. And he pushes forward, and like there are two moments that cause him to really kind of finally break through and take this kind of DeSantis role within the party. The first is his response to the LA like protest and Trump's response to that. And then there's now this gerrymandering thing. And both of these cases are him still being reactive. He's not preemptive. He's not preempting anything in either case. But both are so nationally relevant. Like Los Angeles is the largest city in the country. The gerrymandering can determine the fate of the House. California is just going to always kind of pop up as a relevant place where things are happening. And he's always going to be intrinsically connected to that. And in that sense, he's put himself in a good position now and has already seen a bit of a polling bump. And I wouldn't be totally surprised if he somehow came all the way in the first place in the polling because he's made himself the main character of the Democratic Party as things stand. He's like the guy who's fighting against Trump. He's the most visible Democrat. The problem for him is like, you're not really seeing any innovative approaches, which I do think is very important for presidential politics. Usually when you're
getting in the gutter and going full Trump, being offensive on Twitter, like forcing the media to cover you in the same way that Trump did. Like if he leans into that on the campaign trail, like he is on Twitter, I do think that would be innovative for a Democrat.
Yeah, I guess like to a certain extent, but I think I still would say that the extent that the media has been forced to cover him, it's because of like just the sheer relevance of the number of states at play and the gerrymandering thing. I mean, the media stuff is kind of funny and like he does a good impression, but the big thing here for him is that he's term limited. He's going to be out of office in 2029, which is not coincidentally when the campaigning starts. He's not going to be at that bully pulpit anymore. He's not going to be the main character of the party. He won't even have access to the
When's
account.
he out of office?
Huh?
Oh, you said he's out of office in 2029? Is it 2026?
Yeah, January 2029.
Oh, okay.
January 2027, my bad. January 2027.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So his term is up. He'll be former Governor Newsom. He won't even have the login credentials to the account that he's using to post about Trump right now, which is like a very literal kind of depiction of what this is. So you strip him of that, and you have this guy who's not particularly accomplished as a governor, who doesn't represent a salient kind of argument in either direction in the ideological debates. He's not like a clear progressive, but he's also not like a dream centrist wonder child like somebody else could be, like Bashir, or like they hope that Pete will be. And that kind of center ground maybe is a good position for him to be in the sense that like it like makes him kind of a default choice for liberals who are just sort of tuned out. But he doesn't have much to run on. He ran like what he calls the fourth largest economy in the world, but he evidently hasn't done a good job. The biggest like intellectual debate in Democratic policymaking circles for the past year has been how California is a complete fuck up and how are we going to fix it after he's gone. So the reputation that his state has, like fairly or unfairly, is just very poor. His national favorability, this is the really big thing that I haven't heard anybody talk about, but the current Democratic base, as high education and high engagement as it is, has historically been very responsive to opinion polling in the way that we haven't seen voters in the past ever really be. Warren's standing in the polling in 2019 when she was starting to take off was crushed, not because of like a gaffe that she made or some mistake, but because a New York Times poll showed her losing in every swing state while Bernie and Biden were winning them.
That was that October right before the primary really heated up. When all of her polling really collapsed, I do remember.
Yeah. So that one poll from like this one big outlet really hurt her chances. And what we see with Newsom is that he's consistently not nationally popular. AOC is like meaningfully more popular than him. Her favorability is like -3, -5. His is like -11, -15. So you could see at the start of the race, you could see a number of polls that show AOC to be running ahead of where Newsom is against Vance. And when you get to that point where you start having people wonder like, hey, maybe we can nominate this person who aligns with us a lot more on policy, and there won't even be an electoral drawback. There'll be an electoral advantage. I think that, and you'll have a number of centrists like Bashir or like maybe Buttigieg who are going to be polling better than him with the same policies. I think that like his kind of reason of existence isn't like, it's not really clear why it should be him other than that he's just this main character of the party. And that's what he is now. If the election was held like in a week and nobody had time to introduce themselves, maybe he'd have a really good chance. I bet that if you polled the field right now, he might be ahead. But I think that this is a like really close to peak Newsom. Maybe that saying that'll come to bite me, but I just don't see the kind of like, I try to look at this from a structural perspective, looking at more so from like a perspective in 2027 than perspective now. And this really does feel like something that can be explained more by factors outside of his control than any innate talent that could go all the way.
Well, it's really interesting that you put it that way. I think that there's a lot that I agree with. One of the things that I was skeptical about Gavin Newsom is the fact that he'd only ever run in California, right? He was the governor of California, but before then he was the mayor of San Francisco. So he was always running in a very certain kind of election where he was well suited. He's well spoken. He's handsome. He's willing to sell to corporations, but he's going to do it with the glossy veneer of being a liberal and woke and progressive when it comes to like LGBT people, not so much T people. You mentioned how he was kind of a byproduct of a lot of things that are outside of his control, right? And that's what's creating his moment. One of the little bits and pieces of debate that we've had going on about the 2028 primary is whether or not another person who was kind of an accidental main character of the Democratic Party, largely without their own doing, if you ask me, and that's Kamala Harris.
Yes.
Obviously, Kamala Harris decided that she was not going to run for governor, which is kind of the inclination that I had the entire time. But I also am of the feeling that I don't think she runs in 2028 because I think that she's going to be totally politically irrelevant by then. And I think that she'll always like to have this ability to fall back on and blame Joe Biden not getting out of the race and blame the fact that she had to run the shortest presidential campaign of all time. Do you think that Kamala Harris will run for president in 2028? And do you think there will be a demand for her?
Well, I mean, the demand for her, I think, is kind of similar to Newsom, where it's like this person is the main character of liberalism and they're kind of a non-controversial, just mainstream figure. The problem with that is that there's a lot of discontent towards the party as it exists, and kind of running as a cipher for the party, like mainstream, is not going to be as appealing as it was under Biden. I think people really underestimate, like looking back under Resist 1.0, the extent to which people like just had a totally different understanding of politics compared to now. Like there was a serious sense that Trump could actually be cast into the dustbin of history. There was a serious sense that he was just a fluke and that Republicans were going to realize that this was all crazy and that he was hurting them and that they didn't need him, that there was a real chance that we could like return to normalcy that has totally been like just is now thrown out the window. Liberals are forced to kind of reckon the idea of Trumpism as a permanent thing in the way that they never had to during the first 8 years of its existence. And that puts the whole project of the Democratic Party as it's existed since like 2015, which is that we're like the center, the reasonable people opposed to Trump, just vote for us and then everything will kind of mellow out, which is what Biden still personally believes in. In May this year, he was talking about how Republicans were going to like have returned to sanity. This is something like Democrats have been talking about since the Tea Party, and it was something that their base like really did believe in. At the start of Trump's first term, more people wanted the party to compromise with Republicans and they wanted them to actually stand up to them, like, or just be oppositional. That's totally reversed now. So Biden's success, I think, and it was very on and off, and he had his low moments where like he nearly collapsed. But when he was at his strongest within the party during the primary season, it was that he was able to present himself as kind of the main character of mainstream liberalism. Like he wasn't some crazy former Republican like Bloomberg or some radical socialist like Bernie, but just the default Democrat, which people were fine with because they were fine with Democrats. And that, I think that lane is just not, it's a bit of a poison chalice because it opens you up to attacks on both sides that will resonate with people. And I think that as opposed to this kind of just establishment kind of status quo main character liberalism, you'll have this interest on both sides for like the more ideologically sharp left, which has its own focus and credibility on issues that people really care about, specifically cost of living and corruption, and this class of Democratic candidates who aren't as ideologically defined, but are clear winners. Someone like Bashir or Ossoff or Shapiro, who will have these very like eye-catching electoral resumes that someone like Newsom or Harris doesn't have. And I think that Newsom and Harris are really like that's a good comparison because they both had the same political upbringings. They were both municipal officials in San Francisco, and they were both first elected statewide in California in 2010 off of the coattails of Jerry Brown, of all people, who made his political comeback, was like governor again when he'd first been governor in the 1970s. Like that's how, like, it's to the extent they have any defined tendency, it's as Jerry Brown acolytes, and that's not a real thing. They're just people who kind of went along for the ride in this era of increased polarization, when previously winning in California for a statewide office at any level was a really big deal because like not people didn't just vote the same office for every ticket. And they've been able to get some clout within the party off of the idea that winning in California is some big accomplishment because it's basically a whole country in and of itself. But with everything so nationally centered, it doesn't mean as much as it used to. And I think people will pick up on that.
Look out the door if you hear an ambulance. The Vanguard will be there, sir. The Vanguard will be there, sir. The Vanguard will be there, sir. The Vanguard will be there.